Test, test, 1, 2, 3. Hello, and this is Brian Whiteside, and I'm going to be helping you set up your Drone Complier account. What I'm showing you here is our demo account, so some of the features that you see here may not be as complete as what you will have in your full featured demo account. But this should be good enough to get everyone up and running and allow you to start to use and understand Drone Complier and all its purposes. To do this, one must first understand that Drone Complier is really a safety management system to help you manage your operation. If you're not familiar with what a safety management system is, that's okay. Just realize that SMSs, or safety management systems, are the traditional method by which aviation operations are conducted. And there's several layers of complexity that goes into an SMS. And Drone Complier is a tool by which you can enable the management of such an operation. First thing we want to do is show you how to set up your organization. The basic view that you're seeing right here is what we call the dashboard. This is where you can get a quick glance at your operations, the health of your equipment, and any recent pilot activity that may be going on. Each one of these are just a quick look at the deeper levels of operational requirements that you're going to be building into your system. When you look at the dashboard, you should also understand the menu at the top. When you look at the menu and you're setting up your company or your entity, you want to sort of think about setting it up from right to left. So on the right side being setup, any organization, your maintenance, equipment, operations, and your return to home. Once your company is set up, your operations is really where you're going to do your day-to-day running and day-to-day coordinating of activities. First was setup. By clicking on setup, you're taken to the setup menu, or you've got the pull-down menu and you can just go to each one of these individually. Organizational profile, the user groups, the airframe types, battery chemistry, risk checklist, tax codes, payment terms, and the mobile apps. Mobile apps is something we probably won't cover because it's a holdover feature from earlier versions where you didn't necessarily go to the App Store or the Android Play Store, Google Play, to get the APK. But let's start by going with your organization profile. Organization profile is where you're going to set up your company name. If you have questions, you can click on the little help button, and it should be good enough to give you some basics understanding of what it is you want to fill in each location, each facility that you go through. So you want to enter your organization name, what name you want displayed, and then the legal name if you have a different parent company or a different entity that you're operating under. If you have a business registration number, depending upon the state, the municipality, or the country, you may have to have a registration number that you're operating under, and this would be where you would fill it in. Also notice that you have stars here by these three and nothing here. Where there's a star, it's a mandatory item that you have to fill in. When there's no star, it's something you're not required to fill in. A logo, if you want to have your organization logo, literally you can click choose file if nothing's there, and it will take you to your computer, and you can upload from wherever your location for your logo is. Company address, the city, state, standard things that you would want to see, and then your point of contact or your main email address for notifications. Once you've done all that, literally just hit update. Additional information, your CA registration number. This is critical and required if you're in Australia. It's not a US requirement. And your operator certificate number, also an Australia requirement, but think of this as more of like your pilot's license. For authorization actions, your print JSA and your send CASA notifications, these are also holdovers for Australia, and the CASA operating requirements, and then maintenance alert emails. These are people that you're going to want to have who will be identified as receiving maintenance action items or alert emails about the aircraft or batteries, etc. that may need maintenance action. The alert email recipients, these are names that will be filled in later in, so when you're setting up your account for the first time, this section may be blank. And then payment, this is literally where you would have your licenses and part of your account for your operation. Once you're done, you just hit update. And that's where you start with your organization profile. Let's continue to the next. So let's go back to setup and let's look at user groups. User groups are a function by which you can set a rules-based authority for whatever reason. So if you have maybe a pilot or your pilots and they're all DJI qualified, so maybe you would have a DJI user group. If you have rules for maybe new pilots or people with less than 50 hours and you want to have certain checklist items set for them, this is where you would set rules for those people. This functionality is going to be expanded, but right now if you want to create a group, it's a very basic setup to start. Click on the plus button and you would add in your name and your description. So let's call it new pilots, and the description is pilots with less than 50 hours of flight time. And then you hit create. And you can see there they are. The reason why you would create something like this is maybe your new pilots would have a different risk profile. And so when they're flying, or when somebody's associated with this group is flying, you may have a different notification set of requirements or standards, or they may be restricted to certain types of missions, etc. So that's why you would create groups like this. Groups can also be given different alert emails, different scheduling tools, etc., or be assigned aircraft. So setting up your groups will have an effect later on. Going back to setup now, and airframe types. These 4 categories should be standard and already set up for you. You can create new airframes or airframe types, kind of like groups. These are going to have different rules-based approaches and maybe have different checklist items that you get associated with. For now, you can leave these as pretty standard for the Part 107 rules. These will fit pretty nicely. If you do want to create a new airframe type, you literally just click the plus button, put a name and a description, and hit submit. And that's all it's going to do. If you want to edit any current types, you can literally just click the blue buttons and hit edit. Back to setup. Fuel and chemistry. This is something that you probably won't ever touch. We've created several standard batteries and the information associated with those types of batteries. If you ever want to create your own batteries for whatever reason, this gives you about as much as you could possibly think of in creating your battery chemistry, the name, and then the voltages on your cells. This becomes important because you may have certain unique characteristics, different sizes, and the batteries could also have different risk checklist items as well based upon the battery chemistry. But for the majority of users out there, you're probably never going to change what's already in the system. Also under fuel chemistry, right now we only show batteries, but if you want to create fuel, if you have a gas-powered UAV, this is where you would do it. Risk checklists. Risk checklists are where you're going to actually literally create the groups of a risk type and name. So let's give it a new pilot. And then the risk description would be risks for pilots with less than 50 hours of flight time. And then we hit submit. So again, kind of we're setting up our categories for our flight times. Now, if you notice what I just did here, risk checklists, and then I've got this little arrow button. This is where we start to build in the next level of associated risks. So this takes us to an associated risk table. I know the workflow is not that clear in this one and we're working on fixing it. But you go to that level and you hit the plus button. Here's where we can start to add risks to that new pilot checklist. So here's a new risk that would be associated with that new pilot. So this would be lack high risk for mishap. New pilots have limited operating history and need additional oversight. So submit. So now under that risk checklist item, we've created a high risk for mishap. Now again, we have a yellow checkbox here. We go and we click on it. And that takes us now to the actual risk checklist items. I know it was a lot of steps, but this is where we actually build in the risk item checklists. So here's where we want to create maybe where we're going to insert the item, whether it's in a pre-flight, a post-flight, or an overall task. We'll put this one in pre-flight. Checklist question will say, did verify current for mission type. Verify qualifications and operating history is in compliance with SOP. And it's going to apply to all airframes. Response restriction must be a yes. And if it's no, then the answer would be contact chief pilot for approval. And then we're going to say we're going to insert after. Since there's no other checklist items here, there isn't one to insert after, and we're going to add. So we now have a risk checklist, type of risk, and then we have a new pilot associated risks, and then we started building the checklists for those new pilots. It's a bit convoluted, we're working on it, but that's the way it is. Here's your blue edit button, a trash button, and then an arrow key. As you build in checklist items here, you can raise or lower in the appearance that you want it to appear with the app in the field. Go back to setup. And then finally, the last thing is, and then you can see here checklist items. We can see here that we had the new pilot, risks for pilots with less than 50 hours, and that was added 3 minutes ago. So now you know that checklist items were added in as appropriate. The last thing here under the setup are tax codes. This is something that may not apply to most people, but if you're in countries where there's a value-added tax or some other unique tax requirement, this is where you would build in those tax codes, and it's not necessarily going to be applicable to the US. Some of the features in Drone Complier, because this is built on ICAO standards and for other countries, some of these features may not be as applicable in the US. That's what is required to get you up and running from a basic setup mindset of standing up your organization and getting your organizational profile up and running.